I want you to just pause for a second, right where you are, and honestly answer a single question for me. What is your ultimate life ideal?
Oh, wow. Going right for the heavy stuff.
Yeah, well, and I don't mean, your 5-year plan or your career trajectory. I'm not asking what you want to do by the end of the quarter. I mean the absolute overarching summit of your existence. If you had to, like, distill the absolute ceiling of your ambition down to one sentence on a piece of paper, what would it be?
I mean, sitting with a question like that can be genuinely uncomfortable.
Right.
Yeah, because most of us are so caught up in navigating just the friction of daily life, right? Paying bills, meeting deadlines. So trying to articulate an ultimate life ideal feels like, I don't know, a philosophical luxury we simply don't have time for.
Exactly. Which makes sense on a practical level, obviously.
Hmm.
But according to the source material for today's deep dive, avoiding that question isn't just a matter of being too busy. It might actually be the root architecture of your biggest limitations.
Which is a bold claim.
It really is. So today we are unpacking an essay from January 2024. It's titled Patterns and Realms Originate from Ideals. It was written by Shuifeng, and the translation editing was done by Kinyu. And before we get into the specific, really wild examples in this, we need to decode the title itself.
Right, we have to define the terms.
Yeah, like what does the author actually mean when he talks about our patterns and our realms?
It's the perfect place to start, honestly, because those two concepts form the entire foundation of his argument. So in this context, I mean, think of a pattern as your behavioral framework.
Okay, like your habits.
Exactly. The daily strategies, the habits, the decision-making algorithms you use to navigate the world, that's your pattern. Your realm, on the other hand, is your psychological and emotional boundary.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's the sheer scope of your reality, the sphere of influence you possess, and really your capacity to perceive the world around you.
So if my pattern is, the specific way I walk through a maze, my realm is the size of the maze itself.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it. I like that. And the central thesis of this essay is that both of those things, the way you operate and the size of the world you operate within, are directly, like mechanically determined by the grandeur of your ultimate ideal.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so if you have a small, hyperlocal goal, your patterns will be petty and your realm will be totally claustrophobic. Your reality literally cannot expand past the borders of your ultimate ambition.
Which implies that a lot of people might be physically and psychologically, structurally trapping themselves in smaller lives simply because they haven't set a large enough anchor point.
Precisely.
And to truly understand how this invisible architecture works, the author argues we have to look at some pretty extreme examples of people who achieved massive, undeniable influence on a global scale.
Yeah, he deliberately chooses some incredibly polarizing figures to demonstrate this.
He does.
People like U.S. President Donald Trump, the former Japanese Prime Minister Konoe Fumimaro, and even Adolf Hitler.
Okay, and we really need to pause here and make something explicitly clear to you listening.
Yes, absolutely.
We are not taking political sides here, and neither is the author. And we are definitely not endorsing any of these historical or political figures.
Not at all.
Right. We must emphasize that the author explicitly asks the reader to put aside the personal qualities of these men and the horrific harm they caused humanity. The sole purpose of using these examples is to demonstrate the mechanical role their ideals played. We're looking at the raw machinery of human ambition.
Right, because if we put their moral failings into a vacuum for just a second, we can isolate how they rose to that level of power.
Right. We're looking under the hood at the engine, not judging the destination.
Exactly. So when we examine that machinery, the author points to the specific stated ideals of these men.
Like Trump's Make America Great Again.
Yes. Or Konoe Fumimara's goal of establishing the Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. Or Hitler's stated ideal, which was, and I'm quoting the essay directly here, I want to stand at the highest point in the world and shout to all the people in the world, attention.
Wow.
It's intense, right?
Yeah.
But when you isolate those ideals, what stands out isn't the morality, it's the sheer staggering scale of them.
Right.
The author points out that Donald Trump didn't become president because his ultimate goal was just to, as the author phrases it, marry 10 more wives and have 100 more children.
Yeah, and Hitler didn't achieve his terrifying level of absolute power because his highest aspiration was simply to be a billionaire and glorify his ancestors.
Exactly. If their internal compass was set to simply becoming rich or having a big family, their daily patterns would have aligned strictly with those really narrow pursuits.
They would have stopped climbing once they hit wealth.
Precisely. They would have lived entirely different, smaller lives, just confined to the realm of business or local prestige. It was the massive, world-encompassing scale of their ideals that gave them the capacity to become world leaders.
The size of the ideal built the container for their reality.
Yes, that's exactly it.
It makes me think of a rocket engine. Like, a grand ideal is like a Saturn V rocket booster.
Yeah.
If you strap that level of propulsion onto a chassis, you're going to go extraordinarily far, entirely regardless of what you do once you get there.
That's a great analogy.
Because the engine provides incredible thrust and determines your absolute limits of altitude. But that engine is totally blind, right?
Oh.
It has no moral compass.
Mhm.
It's completely separate from whether you are steering that rocket toward a beautiful scientific breakthrough or you're aiming it directly at a populated city.
Right. The thrust is the ideal,
Yeah.
and the navigation system is your morality.
Right.
And the author's argument is just that without the massive engine of a grand ideal, you fundamentally cannot reach a global altitude, period. You simply won't have the gravitational pull to shape reality on that kind of scale.
Okay, so if a massive engine takes you to a global stage, that obviously begs the question of what happens when your engine is built for something incredibly narrow or entirely selfish.
Right, like scaling this down from geopolitics to just the everyday person.
Exactly. And the author uses a surprisingly funny parable here to illustrate the trap of a small ideal. Let's talk about the thieves.
Oh, the story of the two thieves. It's a brilliant distillation of the concept.
Yeah, so the joke goes like this. Thief A is intensely studying the intricacies of modern fashion. He's looking at all these fabrics, the cuts, the designs, and Thief B comes up to him and asks if he's planning to buy some new clothes or maybe get into the fashion industry.
Right.
And Thief A just looks at him and says, "No, I'm just studying where the pockets of the fashion are."
Right. His ultimate goal is stealing wallets, so his entire worldview is entirely reduced to locating pockets.
It's funny, but the psychological implication there is actually really profound.
It is, because if your ultimate life ideal, like your highest possible ambition, is stealing wallets, then the absolute peak of your achievement, the hard ceiling of your existence, is just becoming an invincible thief.
Right. You'll never transcend that identity.
Never. You'll spend your entire life walking through beautiful cities, meeting fascinating people, and all you will ever see are pockets. Your entire realm shrinks to a few square inches of fabric.
Wow, it creates this incredibly bitter, narrow life because your pattern is permanently locked into extraction.
Yes.
And the author actually backs up this philosophical joke with some really heavy statistical data from China to demonstrate the tragic, real-world results of these pocket-sized ideals.
The numbers are pretty staggering.
They really are.
Yeah.
He highlights that since the 18th National Congress, nearly 5 million corrupt officials have been punished.
5 million.
Yeah. And from 1988 to 2021, over 33 million criminals were arrested. He also points to metrics suggesting 780 million people are in debt, averaging about 140,000 yuan per person. And then he cites a figure of nearly 300,000 people committing suicide annually.
What makes his use of this data so provocative is how he diagnoses the psychological root behind every single statistic.
Right, he doesn't just list them.
No, he argues that those 5 million corrupt officials didn't just stumble into corruption. They were operating under an ideal of acquiring as much money as possible. The 33 million criminals were fundamentally driven by an ideal rooted in individual selfishness and ego.
Okay.
And those 780 million people drowning in debt, he diagnoses them as being driven by the ideal of satisfying vanity.
Wow.
And the deep tragedy of the suicides is linked to the lack of a sustaining grand ideal or correct faith to carry them through despair.
I have to say, my immediate reaction to reading that section was a pretty strong wave of pushback.
Oh, really? Tell me why.
Well, linking a massive population-level debt crisis purely to individual vanity. It feels like it completely ignores the structural realities of the world.
That's fair.
Like, it bypasses housing market crises, wage stagnation, predatory lending. It just feels a bit like blaming someone for drowning when the boat they're on is actively sinking.
I completely understand that critique, and I think it's important we examine the lens the author is actually using here.
Okay, let's hear it.
This text is fundamentally a piece of philosophical and psychological analysis. It's not a sociological or macroeconomic study.
Right.
He isn't denying that economic systems or predatory structures exist. The ocean of systemic issues is real, but his focus is entirely on the internal anchor. He's arguing that if your highest operating principle, your ideal, is merely keeping up appearances, buying the right car, or chasing material status, you are actively tying an anchor to your own ankle.
Okay, so the vanity is the mechanism that forces you to engage with the predatory system in the first place.
Yes.
Like, if your ideal is external validation, you will leverage yourself into crippling debt just to maintain the illusion of success.
Exactly. Your pattern becomes borrowing, and your realm becomes a prison of monthly payments. He is arguing that someone with a transcendent grand ideal wouldn't fall into that specific trap because their self-worth isn't tied to the material metrics that the system preys upon.
I see.
His overarching rule is quite brutal but clear. The lower and closer the ideal, the harder the life. The higher and farther the ideal, the more glorious the life.
Okay, let's actually test that lower versus higher concept.
Yeah.
Because the author introduces a fascinating thought experiment to map this all out.
The 8-person spectrum.
Yes, he envisions a spectrum of 8 hypothetical people, each defined solely by their ultimate life goal. Instead of looking at them in isolation, let's group them by the nature of their ambition.
Okay, let's do it.
On the most basic end of the spectrum, you have someone whose ultimate goal is simply to have a house and raise 3 children, or someone who just wants to become a civil servant and lock in a secure job.
Those are incredibly common, stabilizing goals.
Right.
But within the author's framework, while they aren't inherently destructive, they are low and close. Because the realm is limited to immediate personal security, the person's potential for broader impact is neutralized early on. Once they get the secure job or the house, their engine essentially cuts off.
Which basically leaves them completely vulnerable to the currents of society. But the author's predictions get much darker when the ideals shift towards status and wealth.
Oh, absolutely.
Take a person whose ultimate goal is to open a shop making 20,000 yuan a month, or someone who wants to run a world-famous listed company, or even someone whose highest ideal is to glorify their ancestors by becoming superior and making their peers envious.
For those specific archetypes, the author predicts a highly probable chance of turning to crime.
Which feels like a massive leap to me.
Does it?
Yeah, I mean, why does wanting to run a famous company, which is, celebrated in modern business culture, why does that carry a high risk of criminality in this framework? What is the psychological mechanism there?
It comes down to the object of the ideal. Those goals are entirely rooted in external supremacy, dominance, and envy.
Right.
If your absolute highest goal in life is to run a world-famous company, your only metric for success is beating everyone else. When the inevitable pressure of the market hits, that ideal creates a profound moral blind spot.
Ah, I see where this is going.
Yeah, if maintaining supremacy is your ultimate good, then the means to achieve it become justifiable. You will cut corners, exploit workers, or break laws to maintain that status. The ideal itself incentivizes corruption because ethics are viewed merely as obstacles to the goal.
Wow. Which perfectly explains his prediction for the person whose ultimate goal is to be president.
Yes.
The author states that a person with this specific raw ambition has a large possibility of becoming a Hitler, like becoming a dictator.
Because if the goal isn't public service, but the sheer acquisition of the highest office, then power itself is the ideal.
Right, and any threat to that power must be systematically eliminated, which is the literal definition of tyranny. The ideal just acts as a set of blinders.
It narrows the realm down to a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
Now contrast that with the other end of the author's spectrum. He looks at individuals whose ultimate ideals are spiritual transcendence, like becoming a Buddha, or the desire to let everyone in the world live a happy, joyful, free, and blessed life.
And for those people, he predicts almost zero chance of corruption.
Because the mechanics of the ideal strictly forbid it.
Right.
You cannot achieve universal happiness by hoarding resources. You cannot achieve spiritual enlightenment by exploiting your neighbor. The ideal itself naturally inoculates the person against the traps of vanity, selfishness, and petty crime.
The means must inherently align with the ends.
Exactly. Their realm is expansive, and their patterns must be rooted in empathy and service to maintain the ideal.
Okay, but if we accept that premise, that universal altruistic ideals are the ultimate solution to a fulfilling and incorruptible life, we run into a pretty massive contradiction when we look out the window.
How so?
Well, why does the world feel so incredibly fractured right now? I mean, if the solution is as simple as adopting a higher ideal, why is humanity seemingly stuck in the mud?
The author's diagnosis for our current era is quite stark. He argues that we are living in a time utterly dominated by money, capital, and power operations. As a global society, we have largely abandoned grand ideals.
That's sadly true.
Yeah, in fact, if you bring up grand altruistic ideals in a modern cynical environment, it's generally dismissed as naive, empty, or just out of touch.
It's viewed as a void, like a red flag that you just don't understand how the real world works.
Yes. And he argues that this widespread absence of grand ideals is the direct cause of the global confrontation we see everywhere. When there is no overarching unifying ambition for humanity, we default to those pocket-sized ideals.
Like national interest in corporate dominance.
Exactly, and individual survival. This creates the constant clash between East and West consciousness, the destructive struggle between humanity and nature, and the bitter cognitive divides between everyday people. We can't build a beautiful prospect for human civilization because we don't have enough people holding the necessary blueprints.
And that naturally leads to people trying to fill the void. I mean, you do see movements, especially online, of people advocating for massive utopian shifts.
You do.
There's a lot of discourse around creating a great harmony world, a vision where resources are perfectly shared, conflict is eliminated, and humanity operates as a single, unified family. On the surface, that sounds exactly like the grand, altruistic ideal the author is begging for.
It sounds beautiful on paper, but the author issues a flashing red warning sign about that exact concept.
Really? Why?
He notes that while you can find many people championing the Great Harmony world, you have to examine the substance behind the slogan. If that grand ideal is just an empty phrase, a utopian cover without specific humane content, it becomes one of the most terrifying concepts imaginable. Because nature abhors a vacuum. If the grand ideal of perfect harmony has no specific rules about human rights, someone will eventually step in to define what harmony means.
And historically, the fastest way to achieve perfect, unbroken harmony is through absolute control.
Right.
The author asks us to imagine a dictator who enforces this great harmony. To eliminate conflict, they simply strip away personal freedom. There's no freedom of speech, no freedom of thought, no room for individual dissent.
Wow.
Suddenly, the entire world is perfectly harmonious, but it has been transformed into a global prison.
That is such a chilling paradox to sit with. A grand ideal without specific protective content regarding human dignity can so easily be weaponized into an instrument for total control.
Which means we are walking a very thin tightrope. We desperately need grand ideals to pull us out of the tragedy of petty selfishness, to save us from the crushing debt of vanity, and to stop us from spending our lives just staring at pockets.
But if those grand ideals lack a deeply moral, fiercely protective navigation system, the massive engine we talked about earlier will just propel us into a different kind of disaster.
Pulling all of these threads together, the journey this essay takes us on is really profound. We've looked at world leaders whose massive ideals, divorced from morality, reshaped history.
Yeah.
We've examined the thief whose narrow ideal blinded him to the beauty of the world, and the millions of everyday people whose ideals of vanity trapped them in systemic debt.
It's all connected.
It is. And we've looked at the terrifying prospect of empty utopian slogans being used as cages. The core realization of this deep dive is undeniable. The scope and the nature of your ultimate ideal truly act as the blueprint for your reality. You fundamentally cannot outgrow the container you build for yourself.
And the author's ultimate plea is for humanity to actively cultivate more people with saintly thoughts and grand ideals. Which brings the responsibility right back to the individual. I would ask you, listening to this, to audit the goals you are pouring your energy into right now. Are the ambitions you're chasing going to expand your realm and elevate your capacity for empathy? Or are they, in some subtle way, just keeping you focused on the pockets?
That audit feels more urgent now than ever, honestly. Which leads me to a final provocative thought I want to leave you with, building on the author's framework.
Let's hear it.
If it is true that our deeply held ideals dictate the absolute reality of our world, we have to look at the invisible forces shaping those ideals today. What happens to our future as we increasingly allow algorithms and artificial intelligence to set our goals for us?
Oh, that's a great question.
Right, because the technology we interact with every single day, our social feeds, our shopping apps, our constant notifications, it is explicitly designed to optimize for our lowest, closest desires. It is engineered for instant gratification, for vanity metrics, for outrage, and for quick material acquisition.
It's literally programming our patterns.
Yes. If we are marinating in that digital environment all day, every day, are we inadvertently hardwiring our entire society for the exact tragedy the author warns about? By letting a profit-driven algorithm dictate what we want, are we effectively outsourcing our capacity for saintly thoughts to a machine that only knows how to build more pockets?
I mean, that might just be the defining challenge of our generation, reclaiming our ideals from the algorithms that seek to shrink them.
So knowing all of that, I ask you one last time, what is your ultimate life ideal? Think about it. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and we'll catch you next time.